Hello and welcome back to our second video in this Knockout series. This time we're going to talk about lists. Knockout has a utility called observable array, which is like an observable but more superpowered for the intent of using arrays and lists. Lists happen all the time in any application development. Always like looping, iterating through something, showing blog posts, showing cart items. In this video, we're going to have a keeping up with our dog theme, of course, we're going to have a little inventory of dog toys that I just used some of the art from a previous video I did. And what we're going to do is have a list that we can create, add stuff to, and remove it to, stuff that's very common in application development. So let's get started. What I've done is this is a different pen, but it has a lot of the same stuff in it. So we're going to start with static HTML. I've already wired up the view model with some stuff in here that I'll talk about in a second. But it's the same pattern as before, where we create our view model function. And then when we apply bindings to the Knockout app, which means Knockout's going to come in and hydrate everything, we create a new instance of that and then give it a reference to the DOM element, which is our container. So none of that's new. It's all the same. I just basically renamed the function. And then up here, like I said, we've got just static HTML. Let's go down here to our JavaScript, and in here, what we've done, what we have here is like a quick data set. And what we're going to be doing is building out an inventory list with different items in it. And so what I've got here is just hard-coded all the different types of items we can have. In each item, you see it's just an array of objects. Each object has an icon, which corresponds to a CSS class, which again, I've pre-written, so you don't have to worry about that too much. You can just come into the code if you want to follow along and grab this stuff. And then also a label, a text label. So text, this is the thing we're going to show right next to the icon that we show. This will make more sense once we get the DOM wired up. But basically, normally like these types would probably come from an API call or something like that. For our simple case, we just put it right here. So the first thing we can do is go ahead and make our inventory list. So what's the best thing to call this? How about just self.inventory, inventory. And in the past video, like 5 minutes ago, we said when we create observables, this is how we do it. And so you might think you could just put in an array like that, and you can do that, but Knockout has kind of a built-in opinion on how you should handle arrays. And it's backed up by some methods that are included on it and some performance improvements that you get by using it. So what we're going to do is, instead of saying observable, if we just say observable array instead, this will create a new array. And because we've told Knockout it's an array, under the hood it has like a better mechanism for tracking changes that happen. And with that better method, it can make the DOM updates more efficiently, which is great. So we're starting with nothing, but just like the other observable, ko.observable, what you can do is pass in the initial state to the list here. And so just to like get an idea of what our list is going to look like, you see up here I have this icon types data set. Let's just add one. So how about just icon types 1? And what that's going to do is create a just a reference to the 1th, like this one, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 entry in the array. And so now our inventory is going to have a length of 1. That entry inside it is going to look just like this. So, because it's referencing this guy. But we're not showing anything yet. And so that's where we get into our for each, which if you used any kind of templating language before, you've probably done some looping of some kind. Knockout has a pretty good one, but I always forget how to do it, so I always have to look it up. I'm looking at my notes over here. But yes, and once again, we're going to use our name, our friend, data bind. But this time, instead of doing like text or click like we did before, I think those are the only ones we saw, we're going to use for each. And for each, we're going to give it the observable array that we have, which for us we called it inventory. Inventory. And what this is going to do is for every item in our inventory, it's going to create a new child node, which we haven't defined here because yet right now we open the UL and then we close it right away, but there's nothing actually inside it yet. And so if I just make a dummy kind of li and say item, see right now we will get exactly one item back. But to demonstrate that the looping is actually working, let's go into our array here and just kind of add some other ones. We'll shift it up, so 2 and 3. Nice. And so now that I have 3 items in the array, you see that we get 3 LIs back, which is good. So that's wired up. But now what we want to do is kind of show some of the data. So if I pull this open one more time, see that for each entry we get an icon and a bone, or the text. Sometimes it says bone. And what I'm going to do is kind of cheat a little bit, because I prepared a little bit of a template that just has some of the styling and stuff applied, so I don't spend too much time writing styles and all that. I'm trying to keep these shorter. So in here, what we're going to do is kind of have like a icon and label over here on the left, and then a remove button on the right. And so to do that, got this kind of like flexbox structure ready to go. But just to walk you through what I'm doing. So first, in this first section, what we want to do is use data binding again, but this time instead of doing text like we usually do, we can also do class. And what this will do, based on the value that it gets back, it will, instead of applying the element's text, it will add the class to the element. So if you have styles ready to go, the styles will start to match and show. And now here comes another kind of magic knockout keyword. If you remember, our data type here, oops, wrong window. Our data types are objects that have icon and text in them. And so what we want is like that object dot text or that object dot icon to reference that data point inside the thing that we're looping through right now. And so to do that, Knockout has a special kind of magic word. It's $data. And so in this case, it'll be data.icon. And then the one right below it, I'll just copy this over. See, our styles are starting to work. Talk through that in a second. Data.text. And this looping is, there we go. Nice word wrap. And so, let's see, our text, oh, right. So the second one, we got to change it to text. It's a danger copy paste, I'm telling you. And so what we've got here is for each item in our inventory, we're iterating through it. When we're on the first one, it's going to come in and create a LI for that first item in the list. We got some styles set up that we show an icon, and under the hood, it's just like a background image that shifts over. It's a sprite sheet, just like we've seen in other videos. That part's not important. The important part here is the list. It shows the text right next to it. And then how about, eventually we're going to want to be able to remove these things from the list. So I'm going to go ahead and in this third span, I'm going to put a button, and it's just going to have like a close icon. But I don't have an icon handy for that, so hot tip, friend Jacob White taught me this. If you just say at times, it'll use like a times character, like multiplication, the actual one, not like an asterisk. And it makes this kind of like perfect X. So it's a little bit nicer than actually, I hate when I see like people use the X character, that just drives me nuts. This will make a nice perfect X. Right, so we have these buttons set up now, and they're ready to go, but they don't do anything. In fact, I'm going to wait to implement the removing later, because to me it makes more sense to do the adding first. And so what we'll do is come down into our JS, and let's clear out the kind of dummy additions we made. So now the list is empty, and those will go away. And just like before, we're going to make a method that can be called by this add toy button. So I click this, just like we saw in the previous video. We're going to quickly make a self dot, oh, I don't know, add. Look at my notes here. Yeah, how about add item? Add item. And when you call, that'll add. And you know, to keep this really simple, rather than like picking out the toy you want to add or whatever, what we're going to do is just grab a random one from the possible types. So it'll be kind of like fun adventure. Don't know what you're going to get, but to do that, let's add a index. And what we're going to do is create some quick logic to basically select one of the random indexes in this array. And so what we can do is do math.floor and then math.random. What we'll do is multiply the length of the icon types array. And so basically what this will do is give us a number between 0 and 3, because the length is 4 and this thing will like include 0 as an option. So it kind of automatically does that n plus 1 minus 1 thing for us, which is good. It's always a tricky thing. So if I just console log what we get back, when I press this button, oh, sorry, we didn't wire it up yet. Thing we always forget to do. So we have it created. Let's go into our add toy button, do our friend data bind again, and on click, we're going to add item. So when you click, now, pull open that console again, get rid of the noise. When I click, you see that I always get an index back. It's never going above 4 or above 3, which is good. So what we can do is just use that index to grab a random one from our data set here. But to do that, we are going to use, like, in the past we said that to update an observable, you pipe in the new function, you pipe in the value, the new value into the parentheses, you like call the variable like a function. Because this is an observable array, we actually have a different method we can use to update the state of the array. And so what we can do is self.inventory, this is our array, has a method on there called .push, which if you familiar with JavaScript arrays, like there's always the array prototype has a method on it called push, which allows you to add stuff to the array. This is sort of Knockout's re-implementation of that concept, but it does, again, like we said at the beginning of the video, when we use this method, Knockout knows to re-update the list, and I believe it's smart enough to know not to touch the other ones, to just add a new one. I think if you piped in a new array, or if you like manually created, if you like grabbed the value of the array and then added a new value to that, like a new entry to that, and then repiped the new one into Knockout, I think it might re-render the whole list, which is a performance flaw. So if we use our push method here, we should avoid that. And this is kind of how Knockout wants you to do it. And so what we can do, we got our index there. We'll say icon types, pass in our index. So this bit here is just going to do exactly what we did at the beginning of the video when we kind of populated the array with mock data. It's going to look at icon types, grab a reference of the random index, and then again push it into our inventory, which will then trigger a re-render. So what then should happen now is that if I click this button, we get a toy back. And again, it's going to be random every time, which is kind of fun. You never know what you're going to get. So now I definitely need that remove button to work. So what we're going to do is come up and kind of get the data bindings wired up. So see, right now we just have this kind of blank button. I'll give it some more space here because this one is going to get a little bit hairier. What we can do, and I want to show a few different things here. The data bind isn't just for click and text and stuff. You can also like bind data attributes to the element, which is kind of cool and can be very powerful. And so what we're going to do now is, well, it doesn't have the right class name on it. That's okay. Data bind, click. We're going to call our remove. And here's a little bit of a gotcha. Right now, and we haven't created the remove method yet, but we will. Right now, we are in context of an iteration, a loop, right? So when we refer to data, that is going to, anything that we do here is going to refer to kind of that item that we're iterating through, the data item. But we're going to add a remove method that's on the parent, which is on the view model itself, right there next to add. And so to access our root scope or our parent scope, what we can do is say parent dot remove, and when we do that, that will call a remove method that's on our parent that we haven't done yet. And I'll say remove item just to match the other one. And then finally, but to remove it, we kind of need to tell it which one we're going to remove. And one way that we can do that is by attaching extra data to this element that we're clicking, so that when we click it, we can kind of tell which one we need to remove. There's a few different ways to do this, but I wanted to show off the ability to bind a data attribute to an element that we have not covered yet. So we've got click here, but we can also, anytime you want to add multiple data bindings to a thing, you can comma separate them, which I don't think we've done yet, but comma, and then here's another magic word, attr for attribute. And then in that, we can give it a curly bracket braces syntax. And what we do is now like give it kind of a key value pair kind of thing. So what I want to do is create a new data attribute called item-index. And in that, one last magic thing from Knockout. Since we're in the middle of a loop right now, it's common if you're using like for each or something like that, that you get the data item, the current data item of the iteration, but then also you get the index, like which index are we are right now. Knockout also gives that to you, just like before when we did $data. If you $index, that will be like 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever one that we're on right now. And so what this does, if I did it right, is that this remove button, if we had an item, should have an attribute on it called item index, and that index should match the loop. So let's make 2. If I go in and inspect this, you see that yes. One thing that's kind of a bummer, it's just the nature of the beast, I guess, is that you end up seeing, how could you not? You end up seeing all of the stuff, the Knockout stuff, and that can be a little bit hard to like scan and read, but you see that it is working, where in here on the DOM element, we see item index is 0. If I inspect the next one, once again, we see item index is 1. So it's like 0, 1, it's working how we expect. Let's go ahead now and implement the method that we just added. So remove item does not yet exist in reality. So right under self.addItem, do self.remove item. And first what we want to do, this is actually going to take some stuff now. So when we click remove item, the first thing that's going to come back in this first argument here is, or the first parameter here is going to be the data. And that's the item that we get back. So for us, it'll look like one of these. And that doesn't really help us remove the one because it doesn't have anything unique to it. It doesn't have like an ID on it. In a real data set, you would probably do it that way, where the inventory items have maybe like an ID 0 or 7, 5, 7. That would always be unique, so that way you could keep track of it better and stuff. This is kind of a silly example, but if we had that, we could do that, but we don't. And so that's why we attached something to the element itself, and that will come back in the second parameter here. Not necessarily the element itself, but the event. And from the event, this is like the click event, we can grab a reference to that element that was clicked. And so we do that by basically like event.target, and then what we can do is get an attribute from that. And we name the attribute item index. And what we can do is take this whole thing and save it to a variable like index to remove that. And so let's just try it first. So console.log index to remove. And so I'll add a toy, pull up the inspector here. See, I like using the Chrome one rather than the CodePen one. It just works better. But I love you, CodePen. And so anyway, so I add one, and then if I click the remove button, you see in the console log we start to get back. I clicked 1 4 times. And so this is the index that we're going to remove. And as you may imagine, Knockout comes with a method for removing items from an observable array. Again, in a nice way to do it in the most performant way and the most like clean kind of code way. And so to do that, we're going to take our inventory, self.inventory, that's our observable array. In the past, what we did was push something to it. But if we want to remove something from an array, you can instead use splice. And splice, again, direct inspiration for good reason from the original, the OG array.splice. It works the same way, where it's going to take in first like the index to start the index that you want to remove, and then after that, how many you want to remove. So if you wanted to like start at position 2 and remove 2, you could be like 2, 2, and that would remove 2 things. For us, we're just going to start at that index to remove, which we captured up here. That's what we saw in the console a second ago. And we're always going to remove only one option, one item. So hopefully that works. So if I add a few toys and then remove the rabbit, now remove the second ball, now remove the ball. See that removing is working, and that's good. So here's a problem. I can keep adding stuff like all day long to the point where you will never see it because the window crops it out. This list just goes on forever and ever and ever. There we go. And so what if we wanted a way to limit how many items could be added to the inventory? That is simple to do, and it introduces us to a new thing you can do in Knockout, another tool set in the data bind attribute, another tool in the toolbox. And basically, say this button, as you may know, buttons naturally have a attribute that can be added to them called like disabled. And if disabled's on them, then the browser will know when I click this, it shouldn't do the thing that it's bound to do. And so what we can do, Knockout actually provides 2 of them for you. There's enable, like this, enable, and disable. And so you kind of like, it depends how you want to look at it, but in our case, we want the button to be enabled as long as the inventory is less than a certain amount. Or if you wanted to think of it in like the negative sense, you could disable it if the button is a certain amount, something like that. So anyway, for our case, we'll just use enable. And the cool thing about data bind is so far we've only given references to observables, which kind of know how to pull the value and stuff. But you can also just do JavaScript in here. And it might look a little like noisy at first, but it ends up being quite powerful. And so what we can do is say inventory, which is pulling our observable, and we want to get the value of it. So again, to do that, we call it with, like, call it as a function, don't pass anything into it. Dot length is less than, let's say like 3, or no, 4, less than 4. So now what this will do, if it's working right, is that as soon as our inventory has a length of 4, the button will automatically get that disabled out of the box browser behavior. And so we didn't have to like implement a whole lot of button manually disabling to achieve that. So if I click a few times, yes. And so now once I have 4 items, I can't add anymore. And you see that if I zoom in here, we get the nice disabled kind of effect. And that's all we had to do, is just add one little line to the data bind. That's a pretty common thing with forms. Is sometimes you need to disable the button based on a certain case. We're going to look deep into forms in the next video. Okay, finally, to close off this video, another common thing that will come up when you're designing interfaces and building them out, working with designers, is that we often have something called an empty state, which means right now, if I get rid of these toys, the copy says these are the assets we have to work with, but there's nothing there. It might not make a whole lot of sense if you just glance at it at first. And so often there's text that's like, add your first toy, or you don't have any toys. And that's what we want to add today. It also shows us another feature of templating in Knockout that allows you to put some logic in here, like I want to show this or I don't want to show this. So under this paragraph, what we're going to do is just duplicate it. And right under that, we can say, you don't have any toys yet. And so what we want is this paragraph to show if the list is empty, and this one to show if we have items in there, so it makes sense. And so to do that, what we can do is do data bind equals visible. And visible, another magic keyword from Knockout, visible will either apply a display block or display none based on the condition that we're about to give it. There's also if, which will like completely remove it from the DOM. But for this sake, we're just going to use visible to keep it simple. And so visible, let's say inventory.length is greater than 0. And so now you see that we don't have any inventory items, and we don't see the paragraph that says so. So that's working good. except if I add an item, we're going to see both. We don't want to see both because they contradict each other. So what we're going to do is come over here and grab the same kind of logic and apply it to this other paragraph. This one can be just equals 0. So if it's 0, we'll always see this, but as soon as I add an item, then we'll see the other paragraph. Another way to do this, of course, like we saw in the first video, would be to maybe do a computed text string that would be computed based on the length of the inventory. I wanted to show you this way just so you know like the different options you have. This is, again, if you look up code examples of Knockout, you're going to see this all over the place. And that wraps up our second video, where we dealt with lists and then some of the more intricate parts of templating in Knockout. The next video is going to be perhaps the most useful one, and that's forms and form validation, which is a big reason that you may reach for a library like Knockout to kind of more quickly build up some of these forms with some of the nuances of not being able to submit it if the fields aren't correct, or validating different patterns like email addresses and stuff. So we're going to look at that in the next video, and I hope to see you there. As always, if you like these, like them, subscribe if you want. Also, join us on Discord, and we'll see you there.